So hello, everyone. Welcome to RJ Julia. My name is Jackie. I am one of your event hosts this evening, along with Kathy and Bonnie, who you may have seen walking around here. I have the pleasure of introducing our two lovely guests. We have Lynn and Valerie Constantine here tonight, best known as Liv Constantine, as you all know, here to discuss their newest title, The Senator's Wife. As described by Chandler Baker, author of Whisper Network, The Senator's Wife is a deadly cocktail of medical mystery, family drama, and psychological suspense. I can personally attest to this. As you can see, I have read about half. I started this last night, and I could barely put it down. So if you have not had a chance to get your copy yet, we do have them available at all of the registers. So you'll see them here, also on the other side. And we will have time for a Q&A at the end of the event as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome. I'm Valerie, and I'm Lynn. And I know that everyone here is a reader, but do we have any writers in the audience tonight? Oh my gosh. Okay, that might be a first. Yes. So I think we were thinking about, like where to start, what to say tonight. And so we tried to think of the questions that we get most often when we're at a book event. And one of them is, how did you start writing together? When and how did you start writing together? So I'll take that beginning part of it. The first book that we wrote was over 20 years ago. We were both working full time, and we met once a week and started this book that Lynn suggested, because we both loved always reading about family sagas, and especially if it was a family, Irish family or something, reading about different ethnicities and the customs and the way that families operated. And Lynn said, there hasn't been a book about a Greek family. This was before my big fat Greek wedding came out. Right? And she said, why don't we write one? And I said, okay, let's write the book. And so the first thing that Lynn did was to go out and buy a book that said how to write and sell your first book.
Anything I ever need to know, I get a book about.
2 books all over. Yeah, absolutely. So we read the book and we thought, well, here we go. We have all of the keys to successfully writing that book and getting it sold. And this was in the days before email and laptops. So when we met, I would go over with a big clunky desktop with a big CPU unit and take it to her house. And then here's the other thing. When we finally finished the book, we couldn't email it to agents or publishers. We had to print the book out and mail it with a self-addressed big, huge envelope to send it back in. And then when you would look up agents to send it to, it would say, now, if we like it, you'll hear from us. But if you don't hear from us ever, then you'll know. And so, but it could take 3 or 4 months for you to hear from us. So there is this thing of, how long do we wait? Do we just assume they don't like it, they don't want it? So it was a very different process. But finally, we did find a small publisher. We published the book. And we thought, this is great. This is when Borders was still in business. It's going to be in every Borders, from California to Maryland and all across the country. And our mother thought, it's certainly going to be an Oprah pick, of course. But that goes without saying. Well, it didn't happen. It was in a few stores, local stores mostly. Oprah did not pick it as an Oprah book club pick. Our mother never watched Oprah again after that. And then Lynn moved to Connecticut, and we didn't write together for quite a while.
That's right. We didn't speak for 16 years. No, it was not. Wasn't true. We both sort of went our own ways. I had twins. They were 4 when we moved, and I decided that homeschooling them would be a good idea. That took a lot of my creative energy. So there was no writing for a long time. Except for a thriller that I was working on and had been working on even when I was in the corporate world. So I saw an ad in Writer's Digest at the time for a conference called Thriller Fest in New York. And of course, that's not too far. We had moved to Connecticut. So I decided to go, and I went to Thriller Fest, and I was feeling really proud of myself. Well, yeah, I'm a writer. I have this book that I wrote 10 years ago. And I started meeting all of these other writers who were younger than I and had written 8 and 10 and 15 books. So I thought, my gosh, what a slouch. Like, it really gave me a reality check. So I got serious about my writing, and I came home and I said to Valerie, you really need to come with me to this conference next year. And she said, well, I'm not a thriller writer. That's not. And I said, well, it doesn't matter. You know, you will be a thriller writer. And she didn't know it at the time. So she came with me, and at that point was also invigorated. And so she said, well, what would you think about collaborating again? And we wrote another book called Black Eyed Susans, which it took place in Maryland. And we started querying agents, and we got a lot of interest, but it just kind of didn't quite have what it took to make it. So we put that aside, and that's when we decided to write The Last Mrs. Parrish. We didn't know that's what it was going to be at the time, but we were taking a walk. I was visiting Valerie, and we were talking about someone, I won't say who, and it was this awful woman who had strategically decided to go after this man in her office, despite the fact that he was married, and also was taking great delight in the fact that he screwed his wife over in the divorce settlement, all of that. And we looked at each other and said, wow, it'd be really interesting if it didn't turn out the way that she wanted. And that was sort of how The Last Mrs. Parrish was born. So then we wrote that book, and that was the book that got us an agent.
So getting an agent, which is of course the first step to getting published, is the big trick, because as Lynn said, with Black Eyed Susans, the book that's sitting in a drawer right now, we would get, you send it to agents, you pitch your book, and we would get really wonderfully lovely rejection letters. They write really sweet, kind rejection letters now. They didn't used to. And then of course Lynn bought another book that was called Rotten Rejections, and it listed rejections that Stephen King got, and then you think of any name that is super well known, and of course they've all had rejections, and so they put theirs in the book. And the one that I remember that always stays with me is one of the rejections that George Orwell got for Animal Farm. And the rejection letter said, we really don't think readers are interested in animals. Yeah, they really got it, didn't they?
Right.
So anyway, and that's why we put that book away, because of course what they say to you is, if the book isn't working, just write the next book. And so that's when we wrote Mrs. Parrish. And we were really fortunate that we had a recommendation for an agent. And we sent it to her, and she seemed as if she was interested. And I'll let Lynn tell the story of how it happened really quickly one day in New York.
Right. So again, as Valerie said, at this point, I mean, I probably had a binder full of rejections and then emails, and you just sort of become used to it. So this woman that we had sent the book to, and she said she would get to it before Thriller Fest, and we would meet. So she said, well, we'll have lunch. So I said, all right, great. So we had isolated maybe 3 or 4 other agents, because of course we knew all of them at this point from all of the rejections that we had. And one by one, as we're at this conference, I'm getting emails. We're not, sorry, it's just not our cup of tea, this and that. So she was the last holdout. And I get a text from her, oh, I can't, I'm running over, I can't have lunch. So I said to Valerie, okay, she just wants to let us down easy because we know people. She said, I can meet you in the lobby for a couple of minutes. And she was having lunch with an editor that I know. So the editor left because she and I were having coffee. I said to Valerie, I really think we should pay to go to Pitch Fest, because at these conferences, they have sometimes 50 agents, and you pay extra and you can go and talk to all of them. So I was ready to go down and do that. And I get a text from my editor friend, and she said, you don't have to go to Pitch Fest if you don't want to. And so I knew at that point that we were going to get representation. So I went down and told Valerie, and then we met the agent in the lobby, and she said, well, we'd like to offer you representation. And we said, well, we'd like to take it. And we hugged, and and went on from there.
Happened in the lobby.
Yes,
Yeah, terrific. So we're going to talk a little bit about Senator's Wife. Would you?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I guess that is why we're
All
here.
right.
Okay. So Yes, The Senator's Wife, our favorite cover so far, and I think our favorite twist as well, which I won't tell you, of course. The Senator's Wife takes place in DC, so as you might imagine, it's full of betrayal and treachery and lots of lies and deceit. But our main character, Sloane, is wonderful, and she is coming out of a terrible tragedy where her husband of 20 years has been killed, and she's starting over. It's 2 years later. She's now been married for 6 months to his best friend, whose wife was also killed in the same accident. So they both lost their spouses. They're back in DC, and she's also a philanthropist. She has a foundation. You know, she's just a very intelligent, wonderful woman, and she's been dealing with lupus for the past 20 years, and as a result, needs to have a hip replacement because of the medicine, what it's done to her bones. So while they're preparing for that, they start to hire to interview home healthcare workers, and enter Athena Karras, a beautiful young woman who is very qualified and who aces the interview and just, you know, says all the right things. Now we know as the reader, because we're also in Athena's perspective, that she's hiding something, and she definitely has an agenda. We don't know what the agenda is, but she's been preparing for this and working hard to get the job. She gets the job, Sloane gets the surgery, and she comes home, and instead of getting better, slowly she gets worse and starts having all kinds of symptoms that she never had before that could be attributed to her lupus, because the lupus can affect different areas. And she starts to worry that maybe Athena is trying to take over her life. And she's not too happy also with the fact that her husband and Athena seem to be giving each other some looks that are a little spicy, I guess.
Having dinner together, doing things that they shouldn't be doing. I don't know about that part. But the point is that you do know from the very beginning that Athena is up to something, because, as Lynn said, she's prepared. And has done all of her research about both of them and about the senator and what his hot buttons are and that sort of thing. And so we know all along that something's amiss. So in this book, there are 4 points of view. We have Sloane, who is our protagonist and the one who's trying to figure out what's going on. We have Athena, the wonderful caretaker, and we have Sloane's former mother-in-law, who is really one of our favorite characters. Her name is Rosemary, and she's 80. Is she 80 or 82? 82. And she's just this wonderful, feisty, great character who at one point is a little nervous about something, and she decides she's going to have a cigarette and thinks to herself, I know my daughter would be furious, but what the hell, I'm 82. Is one cigarette going to kill me? And so she's one of our favorites. And then we also have the perspective, the point of view of Whit, the new husband, the senator. So you kind of don't know who's telling the truth, who's hiding what. And I hope you know, and where it's going. And I think that's probably all we can say about the book.
I would, yes, that's
Yes,
all I can say.
Can't talk about the twists. And so I think another thing that people are always curious about is how we write together. You know, how does that work? How do two people write the same book? And our writing process has really evolved over time. When we wrote that, how many people have read the last Mrs. Parrish? And,
wow.
Great, thank you. And so we have some nice prizes here, by the way, that have to do with Mrs. Parrish.
Yeah, we'll take a segue for that. So we have the prequel here.
Do you know there's a prequel?
Yeah, the first shot. And so don't look now, but under 4 chairs is a sticky. So there's going to be 3 people are going to get that, and then 1 person is going to get the mug. So anyway, back to Valley.
So when we wrote Parrish, you know, it was in 2 parts, well, 3 parts actually, but the first 2 parts, the first one was Amber, lovely Amber, and the second one was Daphne. And so we pretty much divided that. One of us wrote Amber, one of us wrote Daphne.
And can I just say, and the way we divided it is who was the most similar to the characters. So Valerie wrote Amber, and I wrote Daphne.
But Lynn did write all of the sex scenes. So anyway, but we still wrote within each other's parts to some extent. But then as we went to the second book, we thought, really, when you're writing, you need to know everything about every character. And because you're writing about each character, even if you're just taking one, you're still writing about the other character who's in your scene. So we started writing chapter by chapter, scene by scene, and that's how we do it. We start every morning, we talk to each other, we Zoom, because I'm in Maryland and Lynn is here in Connecticut. So we Zoom and talk about, well, I guess it goes back even further before we start working
Right,
together
right,
when we
right.
figure out what we're going to write.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, we do interrupt each other a lot, so.
I'm used to that.
Yes, yes. So yes, after we figured the premise and all of the groundwork and we're writing, but what's the really great thing is that I really don't like describing, living rooms and furniture and stuff. So I'll just put in capital letters, describe this room, and then I'll send it to Valerie and it comes back and it's all filled out. So it's amazing. And she thinks that I can write some angry dialogue and arguments
Yeah.
and stuff. I don't know why she thinks that, but so she sends me the dialogue and I might ramp that up. And then also, there are times when a chapter, you're just stuck, you don't know where to go, or maybe it's just boring you. You certainly don't want to be writing something boring you because you're going to bore the reader. So then I'll email Valerie or she'll email me and say, I'm sick of this. You want to take it? And the other one says, yeah, great, because it's halfway there. And we'll do that. And then the other thing is we edit each other, but we're very kind. And so the harshest critic, yeah, I always am. Sometimes that, yeah, we are kind. I mean, well, I won't get into that, but in terms of the writing, the harshest criticism is something like, okay, well, yeah, this is a good story, but I could use a little work. Do you mind if I do something? And of course, we do, and it's fine. You want to talk about the editing piece, the arguing?
The arguing, no, that got some raised eyebrows. The arguing part, we do have differences, obviously, sometimes of where the story is going, or I think the worst times are when everything is finished, say the first draft or the second draft is done, and then one of us says, I think we made a mistake in where we put this, or we didn't do this, and then immediately what you think is, oh, we've got to go back and then change that, and it changes everything, and we have to read the whole thing again and figure out what that affects. And so there can be resistance to oh, no, I think we're good. We're okay. We can just go ahead. But ultimately, as we talk it out, it's like, what's good for the story? What is the best solution here? And always it is, you have to put the extra time in or the extra work or whatever, because it makes the story better, we hope. So most arguments are resolved that way. I wouldn't even call them arguments, but most differences. Sometimes we have to give it to our editor and say, here are the two scenarios. Which one? We don't tell them who is who. And they always pick mine.
Yeah.
Two questions. When you say make the story better, do you always have a character in mind to do one of you have a character? And I haven't read a lot. I've read Mrs. Parrish, but do you have a vendetta against men? How do you?
We do, yes.
But to make the story better, are you making it better because it's one that create a character that really people out there like that? Or
Yes. There are people out there. But when we say make it better, so one of the things that we are always concerned with is making sure that things make sense. And so in the last, since most of you have read the last Mrs. Parrish, hopefully I can talk about that and it'll be okay. If you remember, there was a scene with Jackson looking at the crib, baby in there, and talking about how many babies die of SIDS and sort of threatening, right? And initially Daphne didn't do any, I mean, she was not, I'm not happy about it, but she was still there. And we started talking and we said, no mother is gonna not take that baby and leave if the husband does that. It's just not true to life. I mean, or no mother really worth her salt, right, would do that. And so then what we had to do though, because of course, if she left, the story would be over. So that couldn't happen, but she had to try to leave. And then, as you know, he made it difficult, it meant impossible for her to stay away because she would have lost the children, from what he did. So it's those kinds of situations where, even in the book, we're working on the sequel to The Last Mrs. Parrish right now, as a matter of fact. And, we finished it, and then Valerie came up and said, I have to talk to you. Oh, God, what? I thought we were finished. She said, I was talking to my son who's here, and we don't have a vendetta against him. And my husband's also here somewhere, and I don't have a vendetta against him.
I have a husband too, who's really nice.
Right. She said, there's a scene, and Jackson's in this one, and something happens that gets him really angry, but he doesn't do anything about it. And she's like, that can't happen. And so we had to kind of think about it and go, okay, he would do this, she would do this, and that, and now we're going to have to change it. So that's the kind of thing we're talking about, not necessarily changing to a different story, but just making the story we're telling make sense.
Yeah, we only have vendettas against bad men.
I mean, let's take a poll here. Anybody else have a vendetta against men?
That I sort of look at it like the voodoo doll.
I know, but I think with thrillers, especially, someone has to be bad. So why should we make the women bad?
Well, there is a book where and we do have a book.
Yeah, Amber's not nice.
Right. And we have another book where we won't say which one, where it's not a bad man.
That's right.
Yeah.
How about that?
Right?
I thought about that, yeah.
Up with the idea of, let's say, the senator's wife and how you're going to do the story. How does that all work? That you decide, I want to write this type of story.
So we start with a twist. So we don't always know the setting and the characters initially, but we take, like, again, I'll use Parrish as an example. So, you take the story of a gold digger scoring the rich husband, but instead of her life turning out great, she ends up in a nightmare. So that was the twist for that. So then in, the senator's wife, we knew what the twist was going to be. We knew we wanted a wife and a husband, and the wife to be vulnerable. And we wanted to bring in someone living in the home that was going to be putting her in jeopardy. And so from that, we decide, what's going to happen. And then we build the story from there.
And often it is, from a situation that's just prevalent and normal. For example, in The Senator's Wife, with a caretaker, how many, and today, we've always had nurses and people who might be helpful, but it seems now more and more we need people who come into our homes, whether it's aging parents or you have surgery and you're let out the next day instead of being kept any longer. And so we bring people into our homes that we don't know. We've had, we just take it on faith from whatever agency or referral that this is an okay person. But we all also know that people can hide their credential, hide things that have happened or whatever. And yet here they are living in our homes intimately with us. And so we took that and thought, well, what can happen when you bring somebody into your home who seems wonderful on paper and then flies through the interview and is terrific and then isn't what they seem to be.
And sometimes are you surprised that you think it's going to go one way and then you decide to change that storyline?
Yeah, we've even had a book where we changed who the killer was in the second round
After it was finished.
Yes, which was another major pain, but it was, yeah. But again, it was after we got to know her better, we said, yeah, she might be doing all of this, but she's not gonna do that. So motivation and character are very important to us. So we're never going to elevate the story over the characters. That has to be genuine. But I have a question for you all. So this was originally had a different title. I'm just curious. you know, what you think about it. It was going to be called Dark Mercy. So, no,
No.
good, okay. I mean, I don't know what I would have done if they were all like, oh, that would have been better.
Better. Well, and then after Dark Mercy, it was the senator's widow.
But we kept, every email, we were talking about it, everybody's like, senator's wife, senator, they kept confusing it. So I said, well, maybe should we be
Just
senator's
needs to be the
wife?
senator's wife, right?
And they said, they went to the marketing and sales team and they said, yeah, I think that's better. And I think so too, because widow has a, you know, just makes it sound like she's
Like a black widow.
yeah.
Right, right. So, any other questions?
So I really had no clue what lupus was before reading this book. What made you choose that for her illness?
That's a great question. So we knew that Sloan, we wanted her to have a chronic illness to necessitate, you know, having someone come in, and we didn't want it to be something acute and life-threatening in the moment, although lupus can be life-threatening. And the reason that we chose, so we talked about it, but the reason that we chose it, we wanted to bring awareness to it as well, because we have a first cousin that we were very close to who had it for many years. Sadly, it is not with us any longer. And you know, it's a silent disease in many ways, because she looked perfectly normal. Now there are times when the medicine, you could see sort of swelling and that kind of thing, but you know, you can go along with it and be feeling great, and then a flare hits, and it, you know, and then all of a sudden can't get out of bed. I just remember her, you know, different joints aching. And the kind of lupus that Sloan has is systemic lupus, which means that it can attack any organ of the body. And so one of Sloan's concerns is her mind, you know, is it going to affect her brain, which is also part of the confusion in the book, because some of the things that are happening, it could be the lupus, but she's never had that before. But we also wanted to be very careful that it didn't define her. So Sloan is not this character, like, yes, she's dealing with lupus and it causes, you know, there are times that it causes her to be down, but she's so much more than that. And that was a really important thing for us to do as well. We didn't want her to seem that way. So that's why when you meet Sloan, she's not in a flare, she's active and she's doing things so that you can get to know what kind of a woman she is. And then, you know, her strength and her resilience.
And I think that we too wanted to bring awareness to the disease, because it is, there are 1.5 million Americans who have lupus, and is it 1,600 a year? Or
16,000 new cases, and 90% are women.
Right, right. And it has brought awareness. I mean, one of the great things was that we had an email from a reader who said, I have lupus. Thank you for spotlighting this. I have lupus, and it's the first time I have read a book and felt seen and known. And so I think that's wonderful. Because you really don't know, unless you have a chronic illness, what that isolation is like. You know, just think of a time that maybe you had the flu and you're upstairs in your bedroom, and everyone else in the family is downstairs, and you can hear a conversation and they're having dinner or something's going on, and you're off in the bedroom sick. And so this is something that can be a constant and ongoing thing for somebody with lupus or a chronic illness. And that was part of, I think we tried to show that in Sloan as well, what it's like, you know, the world is going on and you're not part of it. And what does that feel like? That's not a good feeling.
I'm glad too, our publisher suggested that we use a sensitivity reader as well, to go through to make sure that, you know, we were capturing things in the right way, that we weren't, again, you know, not using language that would imply that the disease, you know, that she was more the disease.
Suffering.
Yeah, exactly. And that was
thing,
right. That was really
so
helpful.
noble to be able to, you know, oh, you're so brave. It's like, no, I'm just living, I'm getting on with life. And, you know, this is what I have to live with, and I'm dealing with, and I deal with it. You know, I'm not a hero. So,
No, you're not.
no, right. But the sensitivity read, did you know that there now are sensitivity editors for books?
It can get a little wily. I mean, you know, we liked, the good thing was she was adorable. She was, every page she had comments, and she would write things like, oh, I hate this one. You know, she's an ableist piece of, you know, whatever. But a lot of terms that we didn't know were considered ableist, like stupid, crazy, I'm sociopath, we're like, listen, sorry, but if you're a sociopath and we offend you, too bad. I mean, you just can't get rid of all of those, right?
Or like even to say, my schedule's been crazy this week, and she would write, didn't you think of a different word than crazy? And I was like, no, my schedule's been crazy. I'm not accusing anyone of being crazy.
Yeah.
So it can get a little dicey.
I mean, anything could be, right? Ugly, if you use like,
Right.
pretty,
Or even, pretty,
any adjective could be. So, yeah, I mean, I think, well, we won't get into all, I mean, everything can go a little bit too far. It's a good thing, I think, but so we did have to, because at first we did. You remember you were like, well, we need to get rid of this.
Changing all these words and trying to just think, synonyms for crazy and stupid and whatever.
But crazy is something that we use all the time.
Exactly.
I know. Well,
Crazy days.
Right. And then I turn the TV on and I'd hear all of that stuff. And I said to Valerie, okay, forget it. Like, well, no, we're not gonna do that. We'll take all of these suggestions, but.
but it was really helpful in terms of the illness,
Yes.
because there were parts, I think, where we sort
Yes.
of did make it sound like, oh, she was dealing with suffering and how, there were
Even, but this, remember, like, when she had a blind spot where he was concerned, that was it, blind spot.
yes, blind spot,
Oh, the noise was deafening. That was not okay, deafening.
deafening.
Well,
And
no.
you're
Yeah.
insulting deaf people. Yes, we kept it. We kept.
Yes.
The profession of writing, so, is that, I'm guessing it evolved for the two of you, I mean, you started with editing. Is it worth it if that is something that you're passionate about? I mean, when I think of like a younger person who, does want to do, have writing as a profession, and can you, support yourself? Like, how's the process of all the work that you do, and then, you have to print a book every 18 months.
I mean, I guess it depends if you're, some people can write a book that hits it out of the park, right? And they're on the bestseller list for 2 years and they never have to write another book again. I mean, but I mean, is it worth it? If you're, I think it's worth, if you're passionate about whatever it is, right? I think you pursue it. But I mean, both of us worked and wrote on the side. So it took a long time before you were able to support ourselves with writing. And sometimes that happens, and sometimes I think it's like any art, right? You just, there's no way to know. But I do think there are ways to do things in the field and also be writing at night. But like you look at a John Grisham, right, who was a lawyer, and a lot of lawyers that do that work all day. That's a really hard thing to quantify, I think.
Yeah, I think Lynn's right. Anything in the arts, really, whether it's music or drawing, painting, so much of it is a lot of it is luck. Being in the right place at the right time, and or writing the right thing that hits for that time. But if you're, as she said, if it's a passion of yours, it's certainly worth trying for. It's a hard thing.
So you both work together and you write together. Do you also read together? Do you like debate stories back and forth and I don't know, take inspiration or say, I really like that
We really haven't. We used to. I mean, years ago, that's how it all started. We always read the same books and talked about them. But the ironic thing is, a lot of times we don't like the same books.
True. Yeah, it's very true. Well, I think, Lynn, you read more in the thriller genre. I mean, we do read books from authors who say, could you endorse this book? To read the advanced reader copy, which we always try to do because we were so grateful for the people who did that for us when Mrs. Parrish was being published. And that's always going to be a thriller because that's the genre that we write in. So I do have to read those thrillers. But I pretty much don't read thrillers off of, in my reading time. Yeah.
What do you?
I love biographies, and I just like mainstream fiction. I mean, just all kinds of, even some nonfiction I'll read. And I do feel, you don't feel this way, but I feel like if I read thrillers, then that might influence my writing of one, or may steal something inadvertently from something that I've read. So I try, that's another reason I steer clear of them.
I mean, that's my preferred thing, but I like mainstream as well. I mean, I'm reading Society of Shame right now, which is a great book, and most of the nonfiction that I read is going to be craft related, more, more so than, or I don't know, habits, motivational, that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, there are so many great, and I don't think it's strict thrillers. I mean, this is psychological thrillers and the domestic thrillers and the suspense, and there's such a wide variety out there that I think I like to do that. But we don't even like the same movies. And
No,
stuff
we don't
together.
like the same movies. I give her a recommendation to a movie, then she'll watch it and say, huh, that's a horrible movie.
My kids will be like, did Aunt Valerie recommend? Like, why are you listening to her?
And I hate the movies that she recommends.
The worst was what was the one I was so mad at you? Where Muriel's wedding. You're like, oh, it's really funny. It's so great. She ends up in a wheelchair with cancer. I'm like, what?
Wonderful movie. She's a great actress.
It is, but you didn't prepare me for the fact. I mean, it's like saying Terms of Endearment is a comedy. Like, come on.
Part of it was funny, and part of it was. Yeah, okay. Yeah, all right. Well, we don't take each other's recommendations anymore, obviously. I don't know if are we still,
For one more question.
okay.
Is your first book still in print, the one that?
Oh, yes, Circle Dance.
It is.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah, it's under Liv Constantine and Valerie Constantine, so it is. And it's also on Kindle Unlimited. So if you have that, you can.
I need the book.
I'm the same
Oh,
thing. Yeah,
Same,
yeah,
totally agree.
yeah.
The Kindle and it's like.
I know when it first came,
Expired somewhere.
yeah, when
Right.
it first came out, I thought it was so cool and you could put off, but now I like to hold a book.
We were so worried that the Kindle was going to replace books, and we really didn't need to worry about that at all, did
Some
we?
people love it, but I guess if you travel a lot, but I do, but I just pick up books.
Oh, yes.
Leave them at other
Question.
places.
I know some authors, they co-author books. Why did you decide to create a pen name that merges your names?
Well, that's a good story, because as Lynn just said, Circle Dance has Liv Constantine and Valerie Constantine on it. So when we were trying to decide this with our editor and with our agent, so we went out to lunch, and they said, well, so what should we do about the name? What name do you want on the book? And we said, we want Liv Constantine and Valerie Constantine. And she said, it's gonna be too long. The last one is Parrish, and then both those names, and plus nobody knows you, they don't know that name. I don't think so. And so we said, well, how about we just use our initials? We can make it LV Constantine. And they said, well, there's initial fatigue. So we don't think so.
Let me just insert one thing here and keep in mind, 3 months later, AJ Finn
Right.
sold millions of copies in the window.
So we were getting a little frustrated at that point, and then said, well, how about if we take the L and we take the V and we put a vowel in between? And then they said, oh, perfect. And really the only vowel that worked was I, or it could have been love. Love Constantine.
You change genres.
Right, and Southern. Right. So that's how that happened. I think we're finished.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.